Hi, this is Lee Calcote with the new Stack. We're here at ChefConf in Austin, quickly becoming my hometown. I don't know that everyone else is amenable to the humidity like me, but
oh, come on, it's awesome. It feels great. We all live in other places that don't get that hot, and then you get to come here for 4 days, and it feels great.
That's right.
Amazing town.
The humidity's dope.
I told my my wife we need to spend more time in Austin.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
And you guys are bringing the conference back next year too, so that's
Really excited to come back next year. Yeah, be a little early in the year, but no, just great venue and culture, just a great fit for us and our
Great
community.
city,
so
music.
I've done you guys the disservice of not introducing my guests today. I'm joined by Joab Jackson, managing editor at the new Stack.
Hello.
Yeah. Also Barry Crist, CEO at Chef.
Yeah.
Thanks
Good afternoon.
for
Thanks for having us.
Adam Jacobs. Is it Jacob or
Jacob?
Jacob. CTO at Chef. You guys are hot off the keynote. I think. Speaking of keynote, Barry, I just couldn't help but notice was it a longboard? Those skateboarding skills?
Oh, yeah.
That
I'm an old guy, so definitely a longboard, and that was just a remnant from my misspent youth. And when I was a kid, growing up partially in Southern California, there was two things I was interested in, and that was computers and skateboards. So I spent a lot of time on both.
Somehow those come together. I noticed you were iPhoning at the same time you were skateboarding. I wouldn't.
That takes skills.
I wouldn't dare.
I'd fall over.
And that was just that would have all been imaginary when I was a kid.
Well, a few big announcements for you guys here at the show. I've gotten to spend a little bit of time just, letting Habitat kind of permeate the noodles in my brain. I think I'm starting to wrap my mind around it. It's become real clear to me that there's been a fair bit of thought that's gone into that new offering. And I guess I wanted to toss out that as a topic out there, just to, for our listeners who are coming to understand what that new offering is, how it relates to, sort of your bread and butter, so to speak. And what's the 60-second, overview of Habitat?
Yeah. Well, I should let Adam talk about it. But maybe I'll just frame it and then turn it over to Adam. As we were watching our customers and how they worked, they use Chef a lot for infrastructure automation, but there's a couple other areas where people are struggling and they're dealing with things, and one of them definitely is in the application world. And there's a lot of new technologies there, and we wanted to think about what we want our platform to look like, being informed of some of those technologies, and how could we help and how could we really ease some of the burdens customers are facing there. And then the third area, which we can talk about a little bit also, is compliance. But that's kind of the whole of the Chef platform now, infrastructure automation, application automation, and compliance automation.
The inspect, does that come to front and center
in
compliance?
Correct.
Yeah.
And Adam, you should talk specifically about the Habitat.
Yeah, sure. With Habitat, there was a fair bit of thought. Our mission is to figure out how to help all these companies to go faster and to get better at building their infrastructure, get better at running their applications, their automation, their culture. And what we saw was that there was too much difficulty in how do you take an application, either one that you already have that has been running in your business forever, SAP or Oracle or whatever, SharePoint, right? And how do I take that thing and how do I reconcile it with this brand newfangled greenfield, continuously delivered world? And that problem, when we started looking at all the different technologies and all the different solutions that existed in the space, what became really clear was that we were just thinking about it backwards. That we'd been thinking about it from the infrastructure's point of view this whole time. And if we thought about it from the application's point of view, it would work better and it might get easier. And then we started building prototypes and iterating with customers. And over time, we found a thing that we call Habitat that we think does solve that problem in a really elegant way. But it's why people struggle for a second to understand exactly what it is, because there's a lot of things that you do in tech where it's X for Y. It's Uber for bananas. It's whatever. And Habitat's not a very clean X for Y. And so it takes a second to sort of have it percolate what it is. But what doesn't take a second is when you use it to feel how right it is. That happens really fast, which is good.
Yeah, no, and Adam brings a great point, which we're almost struggling a little bit how to talk about it, and I think that'll get easier over time. What I've observed is when people bring into the lab especially people that have been playing with some of these modern technologies, they get it very quickly.
Yeah, you get it immediately.
And we don't know how to exactly talk about it because Adam and the team really took a different tack than other things that are out there.
But soon we will, and mostly that'll be customers. Like it won't be us. It'll be someone who's crushed it, and they'll be like, this is the thing, and then we're like, oh right, that's how you talk about it. Duh.
Yeah. Excellent. One of the surprises at the show, I went to a session where you guys are working on an additional component called Builder. And Builder seems to bring some, there's a repository element to it and also a build service.
Yeah.
What is the significance of Builder, and when will we see that as part of Habitat?
Yeah, you'll see it soon. We were hoping to launch with it, and we just didn't get it done. So, software.
4th of July happened somewhere in there too. So.
Yeah, sure. But essentially, so part of Habitat is building software. So you write a plan, and then you can build that thing, and then it builds an artifact, and it stores it in a depot. So that stuff, they all launched, and it'll all be open source. What we're also building is a build service that will go from like a commit to automatically build that package, sign it for your origin, stick it in a depot, and then let people cut their own repository views. So you'd be able to say like, in production, this is the list of software that I want, and then use that to sort of run part of your infrastructure. Similarly, that build service, we have a lot we want to do with it. We might go so far as to like, nobody's ever built a build service, for example, where you could bring your own build node. Where for your account, you could just decide that you want to have, for your infrastructure, you want to build it on-prem. But that doesn't necessarily mean you want to run all the infrastructure to trigger your builds, right? So like a lot of that stuff is stuff we're playing with, and I don't know if we're going to build that feature or not, but I think it'd be awesome to try. And we're working, especially with that service, we're working really closely with various partners. We were talking to Microsoft and Intel and Google and Amazon, and like thinking about how it can fit in that broader ecosystem of cloud providers. So we'll get there. It'll be open source. We're excited about it. Soonish. Yeah. Soon as Jamie Windsor gets back to work.
Go ahead.
No, is the parlance there for that build node? Is it a worker? That's I think.
Yeah.
Jamie, and that is an interesting. I think you're right. I can't recall off the top of my head anyone else who allows you to build your own build worker, your own build node.
Right, and to get super nerdy, that's why the sharding architecture is so important, because theoretically we could make the sharding algorithm for deciding where to go based on the account that ties you to your build nodes. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah. There's
lots of thought.
Yeah. There's some. I'm going to draw maybe this as the first kind of correlation to containers and actually to Docker specifically, and then we're going to hopefully talk about that a little more broadly. But just from a build sense, that one of the things that the Docker Hub will provide is sort of automated build of your images.
Yeah.
And so, but this adds a new sort of differentiating component to that in terms of bringing your own. So that's
yeah. Well, and if you think about the experience that you want. So like Docker's amazing, and the hub is super useful, and being able to publish images and have people consume them, like that's like, yes, we should totally do that. I think one of the things Habitat has done is it's about automating applications, and applications live in lots of places. Sometimes they live in containers, sometimes they live on bare metal servers, sometimes they live in VMs, sometimes they live in PaaS, right? And so that's the big reason that we had to build a new build service, because all the other build services were tied to the thing that they built. They were like, I like Docker Hub builds Docker images, and we could have built something that just used Docker Hub, but then everything we built has to go in Docker. And what about when you wanted to do Oracle and store it on-prem? Like, where's that going to go? And maybe you put it in containers, or maybe you don't, but who's for me to say? So.
Right. If we rewind for a second back to, I think, where Barry was beginning to allude, and just sort of the genesis around the need for Habitat and kind of the notion that these new ways of writing applications, intending to be continuously delivered and sort of microservice-y type approach, and was part of the driving force for that new,
for sure.
new
We saw
tool.
sort of this new way for new applications, and containers and microservices is a big part of those conversations. Something that Adam touched on that I want to really highlight was one of his design elements, or one of our design elements, was to work not only for new applications that have been written to support things like microservices, but also how can we help legacy applications get sort of the benefits, get microservices like benefits might be a way of saying it, and even get some transportability of those applications and moving them into cloud architectures or whatnot.
That's I think my brain just clicked on that one. I understand that a number of the demonstrations that have been given have you use containers as an artifact of the build, but support for AMIs and just kind of VM images is forthcoming.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
To what extent do you guys feel like, to Barry's point, that some of these enterprise architected applications might be able to just sort of lift and shift, if you will, into a habitat and
you'll for sure be able to lift and shift their management. So like it's not a magical unicorn. It's not a super and in that, like, if you are running SAP HANA and it's a cluster, then most likely, in order to do that, you either consumed the specific one they partner with AWS to deliver to you that does all the storage magic on the back end in a way that makes sense, or you have a giant SAN and you have invested in the technology to allow that thing to run. And what Habitat does is say, look, it doesn't matter which of those choices you made. You should manage it the same way as you manage the 12-factor apps you deploy on Cloud Foundry. Like, why do we think differently about their management lifecycle? Because it's not. The management lifecycle is identical. The technology is different, the infrastructure is different, but the management lifecycle is the same. And so you should be able to do that. And that choice, like, if it's right for that enterprise to run it on a giant SAN, like I was talking to a partner, a customer, the other night at dinner, who built, they're all in on the VMware EMC stack, and they do the block level replication between physical data centers for every single service they run, and they do dynamic failover between two data centers. Now, I don't know anybody else who does that, but that doesn't mean that there aren't. I'm sure there are. The point is, it's not up to me to tell that person whether I think that is a good or bad architectural choice. They know their company. They're smart people. They made that choice. My job is to help them be successful at making that the best possible thing they could do. And that is a definite design principle behind Habitat. And it's one of the reasons why people take a minute to get to it, because they're like, oh, so it's going to force everyone to just eat Habitat. And it's like, well, sure, at the very highest level, but it actually gives you a bunch of freedom down below.
Some infrastructure agnosticism, I guess, if you will. I mean, to the extent that
yes.
They've got a mixture of containers or unikernels maybe at some point.
Sure, whatever.
But,
I don't know.
And VMs.
If it makes sense.
And so Habitat's been, well, this is out in the wild for a little while.
A couple weeks.
And I've heard spoken with a few others who've kind of drawn some parallelisms between specifically some of the orchestration capabilities or choreography capabilities, if we want to use that term, in terms of service discovery and scheduling and other things that a HAB supervisor would need to do. And I guess the question I wanted to ask was more from a non-technical perspective, just initial reactions and kind of feedback that you guys have gotten in the ecosystem to Habitat.
I have to say, I've been, first of all, we had high expectations for it. And I have to say it's even exceeded those expectations, and the reaction that we're getting both from customers and some big partners. I mean, sort of the biggest names in the industry are pretty excited about this. The other thing, when we release new technologies, we sort of bear in on, hey, we want to get sort of our first big 12 customers actually using it in production. That's a milestone that we pay attention to. And we're further along already on that than I'd even hoped. And, what was it, 4 weeks ago, Adam?
Yeah, it was 4 weeks ago, now there's 2.
Yeah, and we have 2 that reported to us without us actually.
They didn't mention it to
working
me.
With
they
them.
Just did it.
Because usually what happens is you go and you help them and you kind of give them a lot of care and feeding. And so here's 2 in production.
They just showed up.
No significant major bugs. And no help on our own. So we're just ecstatic about that.
I'm a little terrified about it.
That's kind of as good as it gets for a new open source project of that significance. I mean, this is something that could end up being a very significant industry project.
Seems like maybe some of that upfront sweat and toil and elbow grease is maybe paying off in terms of not having to handhold now with some of these customers. That's
Yeah.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I don't want to get overconfident or cocky on this, but I like the early returns in it.
I'm sure there'll be bugs, just so we're clear, new Stack listeners.
And it's a young project too, so there's just I expect there's sort of miles of roadmap to things to go off and integrate with and kill. And speaking of integration, I know that there were a number of integrations in and around either Docker and Kubernetes and Mesos and but also, and I think maybe this is just for me, with specifically with Chef and sort of where you guys, I would expect, sort of rise from a position of strength, so to speak. And I think one of the things that I missed and maybe would be good for the listeners to hear more about is just how the two, Chef and Habitat, really, how they're better together. Or
Sure. I think so. When you think about the stack, when even the description we used to describe it, right? There's the top of the stack, applications, and the bottom of the stack, infrastructure. So Chef's best thing is that it is incredibly good at dealing with whatever random, arbitrary infrastructure you need, and it can automate that thing in the way you want it automated. So it can automate Facebook in the same way it can automate GE, in the same way it can automate, a giant global bank, Barclays, right? And it gives you that power, and it's super useful. Habitat comes from the top down and thinks about, for the applications we're running in those data centers, what's that like, and how does that work, and how should they behave, and it gives you a different abstraction for thinking about how to manage some of those applications. Those applications need infrastructure, right? Like they need to run on something. They need to have an environment that's set up, that's configured, that has those things. That's Chef's sweet spot. That's what Chef is great at. And what Habitat is great at is running the applications and managing their lifecycle, which you could do with Chef because it's a very powerful and very flexible tool. But it was a place where when you tried to do it with Chef, it always felt a little off. It's not bad. Like we have tons of people who do it. They're successful. I'm happy they're successful. I'm happy with them and for them. And like all those things are true. But Habitat makes that experience much nicer. And when you put them together, it feels great, especially when you think about something like Automate, where you have a single workflow that can address both areas. So that single workflow and that single pipeline can easily take applications that are built with Automate and move them through that CD pipeline. Those same pipelines can also be moving through the infrastructure code in the same way. And that's when really like the peanut butter and jelly action super comes together.
Nice.
Yeah.
Peanut butter and jelly. Barry, just from so Hab is it's an open source, or has been open source.
Yes.
It's freely available. People can go use it. 2 customers have come back, using it in production already. Clearly, it's getting some traction. In terms of monetization of some of those, sort of in an open source land. Some companies figure out kind of the right way to monetize and to encourage.
Yes.
Between Automate and Habitat and just and Chef itself, where does that money flow for you guys? Clearly, there's some support and services, but just
yeah. So, by the way, something I'm really passionate about is the symbiotic relationship between having a successful open source business model and being able to make further investments into open source. And if those things get right, they just as you make more money, you can then use resources and do more interesting things around open source. And Habitat is for sure an example of that, because Chef's been doing very well, been growing very quickly, and we took really some of our best human assets, our Adam and some of our very strong developers, and we peeled them off, and we got plenty to do, and we peeled them off and really made an enormous investment, and then took that investment and essentially are giving it away for free. So that's a really different than how most businesses look at things. I think part of our comfort is back to that business model is working for us, and that's what Automate, that's really the story behind that, is we have these 3 foundational open source projects, Chef, Habitat, and Inspec, but then Chef Automate sort of ties those together, creates workflow, visibility, compliance on top of them, things that for most big enterprises they really want. And what's happening right now in the industry is all those big companies, all the you heard Alaska Airlines talk, for example. What those companies are doing is they're creating these modern software factories, and they're borrowing the best practices from a lot of the big web companies, and yet doing it in a way that fits their environment and ties in their legacy systems. And so Chef Automate to them is a huge shortcut and provides a lot of value in the creation of that modern software factory.
Is Automate SaaS only? That something that's hosted by you, or is
No, Automate, our vision of that is either software on-premise, and then over time we expect it to be available in all the major service providers.
Oh, I see. Okay. I guess I have to ask this. Joab asked a great question about Builder, a function of Habitat earlier, but just into the extent that customers don't bring their own build nodes, is that potentially an area where people might expect to pay for additional worker nodes that you guys might host, or?
I we'll have to see. Look, what the world needs is a giant, freely available, secured build cluster, so that we can stop messing around with the configuration of a secure environment to build software in, and to target multiple platforms. That's what we need. Because if you look at the expense that we all put into doing it for no value, like talk about muck. Essentially, everybody spends a huge amount of money and a ton of effort to get to a place where we can run a compiler or tar safely, and that feels ridiculous. Also, in order to do that, it requires infrastructure, and infrastructure costs money. And so the question is, from whence will the money come? So, Chef, we're doing great. Are we doing great enough that I can fund a global build cluster out of my pocket? We need to sell some more software.
Yeah, and here's what I'd say. Is we put our shoulder just in the project itself pretty heavily, and this is a great opportunity for some partners that are interested to come in and come to the table also.
And I think that the likelihood of that's actually pretty high, because the value of that to think about service providers who have cloud platforms and want to have companies shift their workloads. Man, if those workloads are suddenly in a format that's easy to move, that can really help a migration, which could really spike the ball on how much compute they consume, which probably makes it worth it. Or not. So if we can't, then what we'll do is run a build service like everybody else does, and you'll have to pay me or someone, I don't know who, whatever, to have those resources. But man, it'd really be great if nobody had to pay for them.
So we're going to watch this play out a little bit and see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay. And I assume you take credit card, Adam? Is that the?
Yeah, we take credit cards.
Okay.
We'll find a way. You can Venmo Barry Crist. Crist at chef.io. Just type that in Venmo. He's got you covered. Donations accepted.
Barry, earlier you
I just so messed up your taxes.
That's funny.
But you spoke of something that was fairly beautiful, because you talked about taking some of your brighter engineers, sequestering them. I think it was Adam plus a team of 8-ish or so.
Yeah.
And not just necessarily refunding the same initiative and the same project, but in fact coming out with something entirely new, which is, I guess I wanted to ask, understanding it's a new project and there's lots of roadmap, but as you go to step back and look at this next year and part of Chef's focus, and what can people expect? Just more Habitat and more features there, or what's drawing your attention?
Yeah, so from a platform standpoint, I think this actually is going to be a year of a lot of stability. So you're going to see, we have 3 open source projects. Those will be the 3 that I think if we get together next year and talk, that they'll be our foundation. And Chef Automate's going to be the same stuff. Now, there's a lot of little things that we want to do, and collectively I think we'll make some big steps forwards. But I don't think it's going to be a dynamic year from a platform standpoint. It'll be a lot of incremental improvements. I think what we really want to lean into, and you probably heard this in some of the discussions and some of the keynotes, is helping our customers, helping those big enterprises that are really struggling with, how do I move at velocity? How do I move to the new ways? And they're dealing with all sorts of problems. They're dealing with deep silos. They're dealing with cultural issues. And there's a lot of, I'd like to have a lot of Alaska Airlines up next year.
Very good. Yeah, that was a great keynote, by the way.
It was a great
so
keynote.
good.
You did a terrific job.
Well, on that keynote note, I think it's time for us to wrap. I wanted to thank you guys, Joab, Barry, Adam, for being on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming to Austin.
You coming to ChefConf in Austin. And
we appreciate the work you guys do and the analysis and explanation you provide for so many people. You do great work. Thanks so much.
I live here too, so I will see you guys next year. We will.
Awesome.
Right on. Come to the party.
Thank you very much.
See you later.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.